Chapter 834. The departing veteran didn't know that Luo Nan was still feeling a bit awkward inside the room. He had been floating outside for over 10 days since he left Xia City. Not many days had passed, but he had experienced many things. He felt as if a lifetime had passed when he suddenly received He Yuan's call. The reason why he felt this way was because He Yuan hadn't taken the initiative to contact him during this time. Actually, Luo Nan's personal wristband, Heir, and other electronic communication devices were all placed in the underground laboratory of Gear on the North Bank. He could only sense and remotely control them through the external neuron and the soul cloak. In this way, even if he were to call someone, his location could only be set at Xia City. Of course, ever since he rode the Devil Ray to fly, this little trick was revealed. The general meaning was, I'm not in Xia City, yes, but I won't say where I am. He Yuan didn't contact him under these circumstances. This reflected her respect for Luo Nan's actions and choices. Naturally, she had her reasons for contacting him again. He Yuan's voice was calm. She didn't have any complaints, nor did she make any gestures of concern. It was as if they met every day and were having a daily conversation. Bai Xinyan left Ban City half an hour ago. She called me on the flight. Luo Nan grinned as he accepted He Yuan's calm and collected good intentions. He also acted calm, she's already left. The conversation was simple, but there were many unspoken words. Bai Xinyan knew that Luo Nan was in Ban City, and she informed He Yuan. Perhaps she wanted to give Luo Nan another warning through He Yuan. But from Luo Nan's perspective, there was no point in hiding things at this point. He naturally treated He Yuan as someone in the know. That woman really does have a talent for snitching. Did she also leak information to the Amaterasu Order? As far as I know, not yet. Really? This person's position is quite mysterious. He Yuan explained softly. Even though Bai Xinyan holds a position in Quantum Corporation, her role is similar to that of a shareholder representative. Compared to Quantum Corporation, she is quite detached. But many times, her words and actions aren't the embodiment of her own will. Then, kindness or malice. Which is her will? Luo Nan chuckled twice. Who's the shareholder behind her? Wang Yu. Deep Blue Laboratory. Apocalypse Laboratory. Or could it be Li Wei, the demon from beyond? Luo Nan didn't say the last sentence, but his opinion of Bai Xinyan hadn't lessened in the slightest. Someone who doesn't have a fixed standpoint, or someone who can't see through a standpoint, can only be more dangerous. Plus, she's always playing with this sort of thing. It's mostly due to her own vile interests. Humph. Sooner or later, she'll get out of it. He Yuan didn't need to clear Bai Xinyan's name. She just listened quietly. Cough. I haven't thought about it yet. These words seemed a bit irresponsible, but Luo Nan really hadn't thought about it yet. He wasn't naive or kind enough to believe that things would be over if he quietly seized back the 70-format laboratory and controlled the horn demons. The large amounts of equipment and information in the laboratory were still things he needed to get his hands on. Plus, it was very likely that this involved some matters of the past and relevant information that he urgently needed to understand. There was also the humiliation and threat of being toyed with in the palm of someone else's hand. This matter wouldn't be over even if he controlled 10 more horn demons. It was just that the first half of his time was focused on killing people. The second half was stuck in the external neuron, the abyss world, and the lamination interference technology. Matters like veterans and the soul order were interspersed in the middle, and he even exchanged a few moves with a true god. His brain really couldn't wrap itself around all of this. He was a bit confused when he heard He Yuan's question. He Yuan could understand Luo Nan's mentality. She didn't ask any more questions. She simply spoke of a plan. Her Majesty Empress Wu will go to D City next Tuesday. She will stay for a day before going to the Jadeite Light to participate in the event. This itinerary is quite reasonable. Her private flying shuttle will stop for an hour in the sea outside of Ban City. The coordinates are: if Mr. Luo is nearby, you can go meet up with Her Majesty Empress Wu. Luo Nan was a bit surprised. Her Majesty Empress Wu is participating as well. Apart from being slightly slower, there were almost no shortcomings. Of course, in the eyes of certain people, the result of the loss of efficiency was also very bad, so much so that they once again complained. The business strategy of the airline companies is becoming more and more conservative. In this way, the military's progress in the wilderness has become untrustworthy. In the first-class cabin, on an independent seat that resembled a space capsule, Yukawa Aisuk was half reclining and half leaning back. His posture was lazy, which was rare in Ban City, and he only read the news to pass the time of the long journey. He had just finished reading a report about a military operation in the wilderness and casually linked two unrelated matters together. The main reason was that he hoped that Bai Xinyan, who was separated by the isle, would join in the process of idle conversation. Bai Xinyan gave him face, raised her eyelids, and glanced at him. I remember that this is a business under your name. So I have been working to promote the development of high-end aerospace business. There will be mutants in the stratosphere, and there will also be a few at the bottom of the thermosphere, but above 100 kilometers, it is still pure and safe. With the support of technology, I trust the environment there more. The corner of Bai Xinyan's mouth curled up. Sounds like a platform for your special aerospace medal. Yukawa Aisuk laughed. No, I just feel sorry for not being able to show off the outstanding performance of my private spacecraft. Miss Xinyan, I still think that you should accept my invitation and go to the venue in a more efficient way. Compared to efficiency, safety is more important. I said, traveling with thousands of people, this sense of security is more to my liking. Yukawa Aisuk glanced at the few figures in the first-class cabin. Forgive me, in a place like this, it is really difficult to understand the feeling of traveling with thousands of people. When there is an accident, you will feel it. Not only Yukawa Aisuk, but also the other passengers in the surrounding seats were surprised by this. Bai Xinyan, however, did not care at all. She immediately turned her gaze back to the projection area in front of her, supporting her cheek with her hand. Yukawa Aisuk looked at Bai Xinyan's side profile, slightly lost in thought. Fortunately, his rationality quickly won over him. He looked over and saw a few words in the virtual work area, unable to hide his curiosity. That arrest order again. Chapter 836. Yukawa Aisuk's eyes and ears were extremely well informed in the secular world of Ban City and most of the inner world. I heard that it involves a few hundred people from a certain Hengduan tribe. It's a little troublesome to deal with, but as long as the military and police cooperate well, it's not a big deal. Bai Xinyan answered lazily, is that so? Yukawa Aisuk felt that there was more to this than met the eye. You suppressed the Tianqi operation team and didn't let them test your sword. Other than offending people, there's no benefit to it. This doesn't seem like your usual style. My usual style. Bai Xinyan glanced at him again. Looks like you know me better. Have we slept together before? Yukawa Aisuk was captivated by Bai Xinyan's gaze. He didn't feel it, but he felt like his chest had been hammered and he couldn't speak for a moment. There was no way to continue this conversation. When he thought about it again, after knowing her for so many years, he really didn't understand Bai Xinyan's usual style. This woman's actions were too temperamental. That was not the right word to describe it. It was more appropriate to say that most of the time, it was impossible to tell whether Bai Xinyan was happy or angry, and the situation had already deviated in an unbelievable direction. Of course, Yukawa Aisuk also knew that most of the time, Bai Xinyan did not have a choice. Some of the things she did were not of her own will, and she suffered on behalf of others. However, his ability and willpower to carry out all kinds of orders to the end without even blinking was also intimidating. Therefore, in the circle, some people called her black-hearted salt, and some even called her unscrupulous spokesperson, mocking her for being a puppet placed in front of others by powerful people, and saying that one had to be prepared to be betrayed at any time. I must be crazy, why did I want to come out with her? In fact, Yukawa Isuke understood. He gave up his comfortable private spacecraft and decided to take a civil flight with Bai Xinyan at the last minute. To put it bluntly, it was to get out of the circle of trouble in Band City as soon as possible. It was sad to say that Band City was his home base, but now he was running away from it as if he was fleeing from a disaster. It was an abyss of suffering, and even as the head of the Yukawa family, he couldn't bear it. As the saying went, it was easy to invite a god, but hard to send him away. He had invited the two gods from the Amaterasu cult and enjoyed the convenience they brought, so he had to bear the price. In other words, he had come uninvited. Yukawa Isuke sighed unconsciously. At the same time, he clearly heard Bai Xinyan's sigh from the other side of the aisle as well. The two sighs were strangely synchronized. Oh, this is rare. It wasn't that he sighed at the coincidence of the timing, but rather that Bai Xinyan rarely showed her emotions. He had just said that this woman was simply a cold-blooded execution machine. What was she doing now? Without waiting for Yukawa Isuke to ask, Bai Xinyan said softly, Isuke, I heard you have a lot of women outside. Are we that close? The corner of Yukawa's mouth twitched. He really wanted to do what Bai Xinyan had done just now and fight back. But the reason he provoked Bai Xinyan in the first place was because he wanted to chat with her to relieve his boredom. Then he thought about the 20-hour-long flight ahead and decided to be magnanimous. Yes, I'm ashamed that I don't have a good grasp of such relationships. As he spoke, Yukawa Isuke glanced at her from the corner of his eye, trying to figure out what this woman was up to. Do you usually use them to entertain guests? Hey. You're not going to be unreasonable about this, are you? Ahem, if you want to use this standard to judge me and consider the future of our relationship, I will be very disappointed. The topic was a little wild, but Yukawa Isuke was not a fledgling. To put it bluntly, they were just teasing each other. As a man, he could accept such an atmosphere. However, Bai Xinyan's expression looked like she was discussing a very serious topic. Even though Yukawa Isuke did not confirm it, she continued to speak according to the established inference. Now, there is such a poor person. She followed your instructions to entertain guests and asked for something from them. But the guests found out, and it caused some trouble. Faced with the anger of the guests, what would you do, Mr. Yukawa? Oh, you don't have to answer that. Let's move on to the next question. If Mr. Yukawa was even more unlucky and reincarnated as this woman, faced with such a situation, what would you think? What would you do? Yukawa Isuke let out a ha, but did not say anything else. Bai Xinyan smiled and did not look at the other's expression. She extended her finger, verified her authority in the virtual workspace, and prepared to sign the application. Yes or no this time? The answer is already there. Bai Xinyan was halfway through her sentence, but the rest of her words were strangely stuck in her throat. Her finger, which was already in the projection area, froze. She tilted her head slightly, trying to look across the aisle to the opposite side. However, before she could react, the voice from the other side sounded again. Before making a decision, it's never wrong to consider the consequences. Bai Xinyan's finger, which was in the projection area, subconsciously curled back halfway. You could have lived a good life, but you insisted on creating an irreconcilable situation. The way you people think is really strange. It was still Yukawa Isuke's voice, but his words were full of admonishment and regret. There was a subtle difference from before. And that tone and speed of speech, especially the resentful and distressed tone at the end. Bai Xinyan finally aimed her gaze at the target, and what she saw was still Yukawa Isuke's face. But on this face, the lower half of the mouth opened and closed, the lingering sound lingering, the upper half, especially around the eyes, the upper half, especially around the eye sockets, was tight and twisted, almost bursting from the bulging eyeballs. Inside, there was an unstoppable sense of confusion and fear. Bai Xinyan was a little dazed. She looked at Yukawa Isuk on the other side of the aisle. She looked at this powerful figure who could make half of Osaka shake with a stomp of his foot. He raised his right hand in an extremely stiff posture. It was as if there were invisible ropes tied around his arm. Every movement was like a bondage and pain. It took Yukawa Isuk a full 5 seconds to place his palm on the front of his face and press it down. Bai Xinyan could already confirm that he wanted to cover his mouth, to seal his lips, teeth, and tongue, which were completely out of his control. There was no doubt that this was an extremely stupid move that would not work. But when a person suddenly lost control of a part of their body, they could only watch helplessly as they became someone else's mouthpiece. No one could say that their reaction at this moment was more sensible than Yukawa Isuk's. With a loud slap, the palm finally landed on Yukawa Isuk's forehead. It sealed his eyes, almost flattened his nose, but it still could not stop the mouth that was out of control. Yukawa Isuk still spoke in a fluent voice. The method might be a little rough. I originally wanted to have a more private conversation and discuss it, but everyone's defenses are different. Bai Xinyan's mind suddenly flashed. She suddenly stood up and shouted at Yukawa Isuk, who was still sealed by the palm and twisted face. Calm down, he can't completely control you. Chapter 837. Most of the people here were reputable people in Osaka's circle. Of course, there were some who knew Yukawa Isuk and wanted to ask about it. Currently, other than the 2 people involved, the others only thought that there was an argument. On the other side, the air stewardess tried to rush to the scene, but soon, a few burly bodyguards had already overtaken her and surrounded Bai Xinyan and Yukawa Isuk. Mr. Isuk, you, the head of the Yukawa family's bodyguards, Kitano Tsukido, rushed to the front and wanted to ask what was going on, but when he saw Lord of Stars, Chapter 516, Upgraded, Part 1, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 838. Kitano Tsukido's reaction was very fast. The chain of clues was also very complete. However, there wasn't much of a difference between ability users and ordinary people when it came to the level of imagination. If he could think of it, then the few important people in the first-class cabin who knew the relevant information would also be able to think of it. Infrasonic wave array. The person who called out with a trembling voice was quite obvious. The person who called out wasn't brave enough. His voice was trembling and his legs were trembling. He lost his balance and nearly fell to the ground. Fortunately, someone supported him from behind, but it still caused a commotion. Kitano Tsukido swept his gaze over and recognized the identity of the person who spoke. He was a senior official of a certain department of the Sakura government. He was a well-known figure among the important people in the first-class cabin. At the very least, his words were easy to believe. Makoa, this idiot. Kitano Tsukido cried out in his mind. The people present might not know about the Cage Master, but the infrasonic wave array was a standard part of the city's defense. The degree of perception and understanding of it instantly increased. People couldn't help but think, why did the Makoa official say infrasonic wave array? Why did he have this kind of reaction? Everyone was on an airship tens of thousands of meters high in the sky. This was the information age. Even vague fragments of information could be found online. If the information couldn't be found online, they could still ask. Which of these people in the first-class cabin didn't have relatives or friends in key positions? The first-class cabin was instantly enveloped in a chaotic and extremely negative atmosphere. Phone calls were made one by one. Even if not everyone could obtain the complete information, they could still communicate with each other. A rough outline would be pieced together sooner or later. Kitano Sakito's head split into two. From his understanding of the mental side, since Luo Nan used negative emotions to invade Yukawa Aishuk, then it was very likely that Luo Nan used the emotions of other people to carry out his plan. Wouldn't this situation be like a fish in water? Kitano Sakito took a deep breath. He used his own face to assume an even fiercer posture. Mr. Maekawa, and everyone else, please calm down. Return to your seats right now. We have the situation under control. At the very least, there were no visible intruders at the level of this group of people. No matter what you guys did to Mr. Yukawa, it has nothing to do with us. Kitano Satoto almost punched this random person out of the airship. Fortunately, there were still some smart people here. The guy who had just said something stupid was immediately stopped, and the Vice Minister of Maekawa, who had exposed the dangerous situation earlier, was pushed to the front with a bitter face. We need to be treated humanely. The situation we're facing right now is not something we want to see. We did not interfere in the grudge between Mr. Yuchuan and Cage Master Teacher, and we do not wish to do so now. We're innocent, thousands of innocent passengers. This senior bureaucrat was quite good at handling his emotions very well. His trembling voice and body were rather contagious. So much so that two ladies started to cry. Well said. This guy who took the citizen's tax and sat in first class wasn't completely useless after all. This was one of the most appropriate negotiation methods that Kitano Satoto could think of. Although the cage master often took out the infrasonic wave array and swung it around, he only pulled the trigger once, and the range was controlled. As long as they could stop this killer weapon, they would have a chance to catch their breath and even counterattack. Thinking of this, Kitano Satoto's gaze turned to Xia Hui, who was sitting on the back of the mountain. Xia Hui was holding the Magatama tightly in his hand, and a faint light seeped through the gaps between his fingers. Was it useful? Kitano Satoto really wanted to ask this question, but Xia Hui didn't respond. Yukawa Aisuk, who was firmly restrained in his seat, turned his gaze over and sighed. I'm clearly the victim. Kitano Satoto's face was dark, and he didn't make a sound. Luckily, the Vice Minister of Maekawa had already gotten into character. He took the initiative to say, Mr. Luo Nan, no, Mr. Luo Nan, please consider the innocent passengers on the airship. Thousands of people, thousands of families. If anything happens, it will be an irreversible tragedy. Yes, it really is a tragedy. Yukawa Aisuk's face revealed a huge, strange smile. Actually, if it weren't for you guys messing around here, I would have already said goodbye and left. Mr. Scallop, are you done messing around? Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Everyone's gaze is focused on the face of Xia Hui, who had been silent for a long time. But before they could ask anything, a bright light lit up in front of their eyes. It was so piercing that everyone subconsciously averted their gazes and shielded their eyes. Yukawa Aisuk, who was forcefully restrained, also narrowed his eyes. But soon, he instinctively opened them, allowing the strong light to penetrate his pupils. Tears flowed from his eyes, and his body trembled. Actually, this light was good for him. The light on the material plane was projected onto the mental plane, and it turned into a dazzling sun. The heat emitted by this sun was quite compatible with Yukawa Aisuk's mental structure. Everywhere the light went, there was a subtle and clear response. This way, the intruder from the outside world would naturally be exposed. Indeed, the intruder Luo Nan was partially exposed to the sunlight. In fact, if it was a simple and crude invasion from the outside, this Magatama would have automatically reacted and repelled it. There was no need for Xia Hui, who was on the back of the mountain, to stimulate it with external power. But that kind of spontaneous reaction would not be as strong as it was now, and it would have a considerable follow-up power. That's it. The corner of Yukawa Aisuk's mouth twitched slightly, showing that the Magatama's counterattack was somewhat effective. Luo Nan's degree of control over Yukawa Isuk was somewhat reduced, and he really did not plan on exerting his strength a second time. Don't even think about running. The unyielding voice came from Xia Hui, who was on the back of the mountain. After the Magatama's power was completely stimulated, Xia Hui's small body seemed to have expanded by a size. His face was bright, and his facial features and 7 orifices were all connected to the Magatama's light. This was the case on the material plane. On the mental plane, the special symbolic sun, under the blessing of Xia Hui, produced even more changes. It activated certain factors within Yukawa Isuk's frame, causing it to sprout and rapidly grow into an invisible thicket of intertwining branches and leaves. The thicket could sense the changes inside and outside, and it locked onto the completely different nature of the intruder. Its roots and leaves continued to grow, like long ropes of chains, in an attempt to bind and imprison the intruder. The changes in configuration are really beautiful. The image is also very unified. Yukawa Isuk sighed in admiration. Is this a simplified version of the Fusang pure wood? On the other side, Bai Xinyan suddenly asked, "Are you from the Amaterasu order?" The person she was asking was naturally Xia Hui, who was on the back of the mountain. The latter, who was controlling the Magatama, did not respond immediately. Instead, Kitano Sukido explained, Yamato was born in a family of Onmyoji masters. He later became a disciple of the Pope. In the time it took to say these 2 sentences, Yamato Xia Hui had a better grasp of the situation. He interrupted Kitano Sukido with a clear voice, "I will lock onto the intruder's position and immediately contact the radar or satellite positioning system. He can't be too far away from here." Bai Xinyan frowned while Kitano Sukido's eyes lit up. In fact, he had a belly full of anger right now. If he could find Luo Nan's position and Luo Nan had a missile launch button in his hand, he would press it without hesitation. Don't complicate things. Bai Xinyan hesitated for a moment before advising Kitano Sukido, he's already retreating. This is just a warning. Just. Kitano Sukido's eyes were as sharp as knives. Miss Bai Xinyan, the Yukawa family respects your opinion, but we hope that you can respect our profession. If that person can come once, then he can come a second time and a third time. You guys can't do anything to him. In the vast Pacific Ocean, at an altitude of 10,000 meters, how were a bunch of ordinary people going to deal with the powerful ability users who were riding the flying devil rays that were several times faster than the speed of sound when they were riding on civilian airships that seemed stable but lacked countermeasures? You guys can't do anything, but that doesn't mean that the order can't. Mountainback Xia Hui responded. He turned his head and used a cold and arrogant gaze to cut across Bai Xinyan's face. Unrelated people, please keep your distance. Don't interfere with my casting. At this moment, Mountainback Xia Hui naturally became the person in charge. Even Kitano Sukido had to give in to him a bit. Because at this moment, Mountainback Xia Hui was no longer just an external bodyguard. He represented the stance of the Order of Amaterasu. Bai Xinyan raised her eyebrows. Your Yukawa family is willing to be the bait. Kitano Sukido's expression was very ugly. As the head bodyguard, he felt that his authority had been violated. But it was useless to say anything now. Mountainback Xia Hui's mouth was already flowing with a mysterious and incomprehensible incantation. The incantation buzzed in the half-sealed space. Yukawa Isuk was still squirming with his crooked and twitching mouth. He complained, "Why do you keep looking up? The order of justice doesn't do this. Is this the difference between the order of ideals and the order of gods?" Some of the people present understood these words, some did not, and some pretended not to understand. In short, no one responded. Kitano Sukido and the group of bodyguards stared at Yukawa Isuk's body. Xia Hui continued to chant his incantation, while Bai Xinyan continued to retreat quietly. At this moment, Yukawa Isuk's eyes followed her and locked onto her position. He transmitted the attention and pressure hidden behind the layers of clouds and the void. Maybe everyone should be open and honest for once. Soldiers are soldiers, generals are generals. Even if we can't negotiate, we can still fight. My words may be a little childish, but it's really boring for you to keep knocking on my door like this. Bai Xinyan had a bitter smile on her face, but she had already made up her mind not to speak. She had a strong premonition that the less she spoke now, the less trouble she would have in the future. If she could survive this escalating situation, seeing that Bai Xinyan was refusing to cooperate, the other side looked a little depressed. Forget it. Maybe I shouldn't have come today. I'll find a more suitable method next time. Chapter 839. The one who spoke was Xia Hui. This was the second time he had emphasized it. It carried an unquestionable might. At this moment, Xia Hui, who was on the mountain's back, was holding the glowing magatama. His heart was more or less burning. It was for his own luck and for the power he was in control of at this moment. The situation in front of him, the time, the place, and the form were all unexpected. But the situation itself, which was Luo Nan's revenge against Yukawa Aishuk, was foretold by the Pope when he sent Luo Nan to be Yukawa Aishuk's bodyguard. Therefore, Xia Hui was very confident. He calmly stimulated the magatama's power and fused it with it. At this moment, his perception became the tip of the Fusang divine tree's roots that pierced through the endless void. He projected everything that was happening in front of him, waiting for the response from the highest level and receiving the incoming godly power. During this time, just the fine tentacles at the end of the root had already unfolded into an intricate and magnificent scroll in front of him. The exquisite uses of the high-end power were presented in an inconceivable geometrical structure and an even more exquisite and microscopic mode of energy usage. The cage master called it a configuration. How appropriate! But how does it feel to be trapped by a configuration? Xia Hui's mental plane was momentarily dazed. This was the unavoidable result of receiving the high-end power. But he was very experienced in this aspect. He quickly gathered his consciousness and calmed his mind to avoid any negative effects. He also had to be careful of the cage master's unpredictable mental invasion. His performance seemed fierce, but every step he took was solid. This was one of the most important reasons why the Pope valued him. Right now, he was in the middle of passing and waiting. It was also at this moment that Xia Hui saw Yukawa Aishuk, whose mouth was crooked due to the interference of the magatama's power. He struggled to move his lips and speak again. It seems that the two in Ban City really have nothing to do with you. Then pass. We will use the elimination method and try a few more times. In the end, you won't be able to hide it. What a loathsome, arrogant and conceited fellow. After the initial, so beautiful, comment, the person behind Yukawa Aishuk no longer paid attention to the configuration scroll on the mental plane. He just stared at Bai Xinyan and said some words that he didn't really understand. On the back of the mountain, Xia Hui was infuriated. It was fine if they ignored him, but in front of the grand structure of the great divine treasure of the Fusang divine tree, no one in this world could display such an attitude. I told you, there won't be a next time. It was a little deliberate to emphasize it for the third time, but Xia Hui was not doing it for his own character. He was doing it for the respect that the two lords of Amaterasu deserved. I've got you. You use a lot of exclamations. What? This sudden sentence caused Xia Hui's thoughts and emotions to stagnate. He was, after all, a Class B mind master, and he was very sensitive to the relevant fields. With this reminder, he did not let himself be led around by the nose. Instead, he suddenly realized a crucial point. Wasn't the feedback from the propping mulberry tree's great divine treasure a little too slow? It was also at this moment that Yukawa Aishuk, with his crooked mouth and slanted eyes, revealed a horrifying smile. That Pope of Baji didn't teach you seriously. Such a complicated configuration. You know how it works, but you don't know why. How can you succeed? Under the effect of the Magatama's power, Yukawa Aishuk gradually lost control over the structure of Yukawa Aishuk's body and soul. But the muffled voice in his throat was like a highly viscous acid. It sprayed out and adhered to Xia Hui's face and soul, burning and penetrating. There were two waves of pain. The first wave was the pain of being pierced in the deepest and most private corner of one's heart. The other wave was the unique sense of danger that came from the mind. Oh no, I've been hit. Without giving Xia Hui a chance to analyze it in depth, in the spiritual plane that he saw and sensed, the exquisite composition that had been unfurled actually began to slowly roll back. It was retracted. Xia Hui's eyeballs nearly bulged out of their sockets like Yukawa Aishuk's. His consciousness played no role at all. In fact, it was just as Luonan said. The Pope of Baji gave Xia Hui the method to stimulate and maintain the Magatama's power, but she did not give him the method to use it flexibly. The Pope of Baji did not go so far as to be selfish. It was mainly because Xia Hui had not reached that level. He did not possess the knowledge reserves. Every structure, every section, and every detail of such a complex structure would affect the entire structure. Xia Hui, who was on the back of the mountain, was able to maintain the stability of the whole structure and successfully act as a fulcrum to sense and feed back information. He was already worthy of the role the church had given him. But this kind of role was not enough in the face of the orderly retraction of the configuration before his eyes. Spilled water was hard to retrieve, but everything that appeared on the mental plane was simply like reversing time. The power of the Fusang divine tree that had already unfurled was retracted bit by bit. It came back the way it came. There was not a trace of error, not a bit of wastage, but even on the mental plane, the circulation of energy had to obey basic laws. How could entropy increase and entropy decrease consume the same amount of energy? The most terrifying expenditure of the effect of reversing time was the astronomical calculation of the law. It consumed Luo Nan's brain power and control. He did it if he wanted to. But the remaining portion was completely squeezed back into the power of the Magatama, and this power was suppressed back to its original state. Xia Hui and the Magatama were affected by the entire activation mechanism. To a certain degree, they were one entity. There was no need to consider the boundaries of the reverse retraction. The retraction of the Magatama's power took advantage of the situation and pushed Xia Hui back in time. Of course, this was an exaggeration. His mental state and mind were completely unprepared for the retraction of the Magatama's power. His entire body was crushed to the point of suffocation. His swollen body instantly deflated. Xia Hui's body looked like it had its bones pulled out. He fell limply to the ground, unconscious. Phew. That was close. Yukawa Aishuk sighed as he looked at Xia Hui, who was on the back of the mountain. I almost got myself into big trouble. Fortunately, Luo Nan had fought with the propping mulberry tree system of the Amaterasu cult many times over the past few days. He had seen the brain demon, the horn demon, the fat dragon, and many other similar tricks. Only then was he able to come up with this method of reverse sealing. Of course, this was also because he saw the opportunity quickly and made use of his understanding of the configuration of the great divine treasure of the Fusang divine tree. He also made use of the opportunity when Xia Hui was controlling the Magatama on the back of the mountain and had no time to pay attention to anything else. He took the first step to induce his negative emotions, giving him illusions and misleading him, distorting the feedback of the entire sensory channel. Just this skill alone was enough to prove that he hadn't been communicating with Mr. Bai for half a year. But the more it was like this, the harder it was for Luo Nan to deal a heavy blow to Bai Xinyan. He didn't have much hope that the previous threats would achieve anything. Also, sealing off the mountain back of Xia Hui might not solve the problem once and for all. Perhaps choosing to come here today was a mistake in itself. Luo Nan brought Yukawa Aishuk to Sai, breaking the deathly silence in the first-class cabin. He was still the center of attention. Everyone's gazes were filled with fear, bewilderment, and ignorance. At least at this very moment, every single one of them had basically lost the will and confidence to control their own lives. In reality, their fates of life and death depended on Luo Nan's will. It depended on a single thought. This included Kitano Sakuto, who had clenched his fists but couldn't find a target to exert his strength on. This head bodyguard stared blankly at Xia Hui on the back of the mountain. He looked at his temporary partner. Xia Hui held the magatama that was no longer glowing. Xia Hui curled up on the ground. Xia Hui's aura was completely restrained and sealed. It was as if Xia Hui had been sealed into an invisible container. Chapter 840. The drunk business elite pushed himself up from the VIP seat and moved over step by step. His fluttering footsteps and exceptionally bright eyes were completely different from normal, but he naturally formed an inexplicable harmony with the other abnormal creature on this side. At the same time, he also separated the other relatively normal fellows from him. It was this kind of situation that reduced the difficulty of understanding Yukawa Aishuk's nagging and complaints. A smart person like the Mayada vice officer of affairs instinctively discovered the conflicting and uneasy factors. But he couldn't retract his prawn-like body for a while. He awkwardly froze there. What was even worse was that Yukawa Aishuk and the others were in the middle of the first-class cabin. The drunkard who came up later had to pass by a group of people if he wanted to get there. This included the Mayada vice officer of affairs. The drunkard didn't give the Mayada vice officer of affairs a chance to think deeply before he passed by. He even said, "Excuse me." A surprisingly dry and hot palm pressed down on the former vice secretary of affairs' head, borrowing a little strength to continue moving forward. As for the former vice secretary of affairs, he had turned from a bent prawn into cooked prawn meat. His entire body was paralyzed on the ground, and he had lost consciousness. The sudden collapse of the Mayada vice officer of affairs didn't cause panic among the people around him. In fact, as these two extraordinary people gradually approached each other, any strange situation seemed to be within reason. Moreover, the drunkard was still talking, attracting most of the attention. "My job is not up to standard. The number of devout believers is limited, and the ability users are even more scarce. Losing even one is a loss. Your drastic measures are very beautiful, but they are also giving me a difficult problem." His tone and wording were ordinary. Only the content of his words required others to think carefully. But even a person with a brain ischemia could understand at this time that another big shot had arrived. Yukawa Aishuk stood next to his seat. He stared at the newcomer and didn't say anything. He just sighed. On the other side, Bai Xinyan glanced at the unconscious mountain-back Xia Hui on the ground. She didn't know the details of the drastic measures, but she could tell from common sense that the most suitable target for the new big shot soul wasn't a business elite coming from business class. It was Xia Hui on the mountain back. These twists and turns only served to confirm that Luo Nan's methods were brilliant, and he possessed considerable foresight. Of course, if this big shot wanted to come over, it was impossible to stop him. At most, it would just be a few more unlucky people. The drunkard said something that seemed to be clear, but it wasn't. Then, he wandered off. Not only him, but the people around him who had been influenced by what he saw and heard also instinctively bowed, each more obedient and humble than the last. There was also Bai Xinyan. She also bowed, her eyebrows drooping, and naturally held her breath. Outside the cabin, there was chaos as if a bomb had gone off, but inside the cabin, everyone was as silent as cicadas in winter. Between these two completely different scenes, the only similarity was probably the huge tension created by terror and absurdity, and the heart-wrenching pain that tore at people's hearts. Amidst the implicit and explicit agitation that tore at his heart, the drunkard spoke again. His tone was still very flat, but the information that came out of his mouth was like a flame that had finally burned through a curtain. It was a hot stream that rushed at his face. I am Hayaki. Kitano Sueto, by Sinyan, and the group of bodyguards subconsciously lowered their bodies a little more to show their reverence for this title. Yukawa Aishuk's mouth twitched. Hayaki. Pope. In the entire first-class cabin, only Yukawa Aishuk kept his body relatively straight. Of course, those who knew the truth knew that it was not the body that was straight, but the external soul that was supporting the body. The Pope of Hayaki, who had descended with the body of a believer, maintained a calm tone. It seemed that the slightest fluctuation could break the balance that had been maintained until now. Young man, you have a tendency to refuse communication. You are very hostile toward the Amaterasu order. The Pope of Hayaki was stating a fact. For the logic behind the fact to be established, more details needed to be filled in. This was equivalent to a kind of interrogation. So Yukawa Aishuk opened his mouth to say, hee. Luo Nan had no intention of responding. He just used Yukawa Aishuk's eyes and ears, as well as a wider and richer medium, to seriously observe and perceive, and to make adjustments. He adjusted himself to the best possible state. At this time, the first-class cabin that was hit by a terror bomb had already been lucky enough to rush out. But at the same time, they allowed the destruction of the terror bomb to spread to a larger area. Not a single person in the business or economy class was spared. Even the cockpit. The captain and the others should have already known about the unforeseen event that happened in the first-class cabin. They had not reacted before, but after a few minutes of delay, their reactions suddenly affected the entire airship. This colossus high up in the sky suddenly lowered its altitude and tilted. Although it quickly returned to normal, it still caused a group of people in the first-class cabin who did not have their seatbelts fastened to be in a rather sorry state. 2 bodyguards, who only cared about bowing, fell to the ground. They grabbed the handrails beside them with all their might to prevent themselves from crashing into the terrifying drunkard in front of them. At this moment, their hearts were about to explode. Bai Xinyan's body swayed, but she quickly regained her balance. She glanced outside the porthole. She didn't know when, but the airship had already sunk into the hazy layer of clouds. Smoke billowed outside the porthole, mixing with the curtain of night over the Pacific Ocean. As the 2 people at the center of the incident, whether it was Yukawa Aishuk or the drunkard, they were still mere mortals. They did not have the ability to take root in the swaying airship. During this period, they were swaying left and right, but there was still a conversation going on between them. It was mainly the Pope of Baiji who spoke. He even changed the direction of the conversation. Your spiritual configuration design is very good, but the spiritual realm is not a safe place. The higher you build now, the harder you will fall in the future. Is that so? Yukawa Aishuk replied casually. If the back of his head had not hit the outer shell of the space cabin next to him, he would have sounded more like a gentleman. The drunkard supported himself on the outer shell of the space cabin. He was barely able to maintain his image. At least his words were steady. Young people can be unscrupulous, but they should always think about the suffering in the future. As if you know anything. We can discuss and communicate. These people's original intentions were mostly the same, but they were too stupid and arrogant. Then, you are cunning and sinister, right? The airship returned to normal. Most of the people in the chaotic first-class cabin were still in a state of shock. The last round of dialogue, especially the one with the Pope of Baiji, had a seriously low intake and digestion. Comparatively speaking, Luo Nan had borrowed Yukawa Aishuk's mouth to reveal his emotions. They were very straightforward and easy to understand. It was very hard to accept. The other side was an extraordinary. Even though he had borrowed the power of his believers to descend in an incomplete form, his authority ranking in the inner world and the entire earth had been in the top 10 for many years. He was even in the top 5. This was especially true in the eyes of Kitano Sakuto and the other ability users who were registered in Sakura City. The Pope of Baiji and the Amaterasu order that he represented were like the vault of heaven that covered the skies above Sakura City. They were like the sun that brought about changes. Luo Nan's attitude. They could not see Luo Nan behind Yukawa Aishuk, but they could see the drunkard on the other side laughing softly. Oh my, can you tell? Yeah. Sakura City is too close. Yukawa Aishuk's body fell to the ground as soon as he finished speaking. At the same time, the skies above the Pacific Ocean, which was supposed to be dark in the night, suddenly flashed with a powerful light. The light didn't fall from the sky, and it was as bright as day within a radius of hundreds of kilometers. Chapter 841. The airship in the stratosphere was in the nighttime region. It was pitch black outside, and there was nothing to see. Many passengers had taken off their sunshades, preparing to take a long nap and get used to the jet lag. At least, that was the case half a minute ago. The shock wave of the bomb of terror in the first-class cabin shattered the beautiful dreams of quite a few people. But what truly caused the passengers to wake up and go into an uproar was the endless, all-encompassing, unstoppable bright light. In this instant, it didn't matter if it was the thin sunshades or the thick outer shell of the airship. It didn't matter if it was the clear-headed eyewitnesses or the confused, frightened passengers. Everything was illuminated by the strong light. The inner walls of the outer shell, the skin, the bones, and the flesh, everything became transparent and even nothingness. Within the airship, all shadows were instantly swept away. Then what was erased were the differences between people, between objects, and even between objects. There were only panicked and petty souls that tumbled and screamed within the boundless strong light. Even though it was only for an instant, and it was like an illusion, it still exceeded the limits of what the vast majority of people could endure. The commotion on the airship got out of hand. Bai Xinyan still maintained her bowed posture, but she instinctively pulled in her shoulders and elbows. She shrunk a bit. As a woman, the feeling of being illuminated inside and out was truly terrible. But she could understand that this was the manifestation of the true gods of the Amaterasu order, the projection of power across space. It was just as the bastard who ran away said. This place wasn't that far from Ban City. 1,400 kilometers. As long as there was a tiny fulcrum, the two experts of the Amaterasu order could easily project their consciousness and power here. The only difference was the length of time and the intensity of the projection. Right now, it looked like the two of the Amaterasu order were yin and yang. One was restrained, and the other was unrestrained. Even the so-called restraint was only relative. In that case, had Luo Nan managed to escape from the pincer attack of the Pope of 100 Collections and true god Chenju? What do you think of this scene as compared to a daydream? A flat voice came into her ears. It didn't even bother to raise the question. It was because the voice was too flat that Bai Xinyan was unable to understand it immediately. She subconsciously asked. What? Only then did she realize that the person who had just spoken to her was the Pope of the 100 Communities. The second in command of the Amaterasu cult, who had descended from the sky, manipulated the puppet, which was obviously unwieldy, to raise its wrist to look at its watch. There was indeed a watch on the puppet's wrist, and it showed the time in Osaka. Everyone's movements froze for a moment. Only the Pope of Hakuji controlled the puppet to extend its hand and use it to replace the tip of the boot to press on Yamashita Xiaohui's shoulder. Bai Xinyan narrowed her eyes. Although the entire process was not long, she could see, and the others could also see, that the Pope puppet's fingertip was clearly trembling. Even when it pressed on Yamashita Xiaohui's shoulder, it only calmed down a little. She roughly understood why the Pope of Hakuji was putting on airs. For an extraordinary, high-intensity output from more than 1,400 kilometers away was not that easy to deal with. Without a solid fulcrum, the puppet had strength but was unable to use it. It also needed to perform micromanipulation to avoid bursting the small water pipe. From this, it could be seen that the majority of the Pope of Hakuji's energy was consumed on this. Even so, the problem of accelerated depreciation was unavoidable. The puppet's outstretched hand maintained a pressing posture on Yamashita Hui's shoulder for over 10 seconds. During this time, the puppet's skin was clearly red. Fine sweat seeped out of its pores, and there were even faint specks of blood. It was only because the puppet had a drunken appearance that it was not overly eye-catching. But even with such strength, Yamashita Hui didn't show any reaction. This technique. Bai Xinyan lowered her eyes. She made a hypothesis based on this. If the Pope of Hakuji had the support of a B-rank psychic like Yamashita Hui, then the Pope of Hakuji would certainly be much more relaxed than he was right now. But Yamashita Hui had fainted, and he seemed to be quite heavy. It was hard to say who would be at a disadvantage if they were to fight a protracted battle like this. TSK. Luo Nan's grasp of the situation and his control of the details was much more experienced than imagined. It was as if he was exchanging blows with extraordinaries from time to time. Where did he accumulate this experience and insight from? At this time, Bai Xinyan heard the puppet's breathing. It was as if there was a tube of iron sand in its throat, making a rustling sound. She relied on her many years of experience in researching the human body. Her first judgment was that Xia Hui had developed severe symptoms of laryngeal edema. Eliminating the cause of infection, his heart and kidney functions were most likely abnormal. Under the strong pressure, the internal organs of the human body had suffered irreversible damage, and the damage was continuing to worsen. There was no possibility of relief. Bai Xinyan was able to discern so much information due to her personal ability level. The others didn't have this ability. They could only passively wait. In particular, the bodyguard who was preparing to move Yamashita Hui maintained a half-squatting posture. He didn't dare to move. He waited for over 10 seconds, and all he got was the Pope puppet's sigh. He felt a dry sensation suddenly press against the top of his head. He seemed to hear a cry of alarm, or perhaps it was the sound of the explosion outside the window. Then, it was meaningless to him. All sounds in the first-class cabin disappeared. The Pope puppet's sigh also disappeared. At the same time, the symptoms of laryngeal edema also disappeared. At the very least, it was temporarily alleviated. The price was the bodyguard who had fallen onto Yamashita Hui. That person's skin and flesh were already limp. There was no breath left. The way he died was no different from the Maikawa Vice Minister of Affairs. The surrounding bodyguards all had deathly pale faces. As full-time members of the Yuchuan family, they had seen quite a few situations of internal handling. But this kind of situation where they were treated as a power bank was truly unprecedented. The important question was, whose turn would it be next? The hearts of the people were in turmoil, but now was not the time to pacify them. Whether it was by Xinyan or Kitano Sukito, neither of them cared about these things. From their perspective, what they needed to pay more attention to was the new clear instructions the Pope of 100 Gatherings made after helping the puppet catch its breath. The hand that had just reaped a life flipped over. Its palm faced upwards, and it hooked its finger. Kitano Sukito's reaction was maintained at a high standard. He bent down again and, with absolute respect, handed over the mimicry generator. It was also at this time that he saw a cluster of greenish-black veins appear on the palm. It looked like the expanding capillaries under the skin, but it was more like the shadow of a tree with branches growing horizontally. Within the dark veins, there was clearly light flowing, filled with a different kind of vitality. But just thinking about its most likely source made one shudder. Kitano Sukito instinctively wanted to keep his distance from the Pope puppet. He wanted to retreat after completing his task. But the latter had no intention of taking over. Perhaps it felt that the distance and height were just right, so it simply used Kitano Sukito as a table. It stretched its hand over the control area of the device and began to operate it. Ha! Kitano Sukito's pupils dilated as he watched the Pope puppet's fingertips switch back and forth between the virtual interface and the physical buttons. Especially with the appearance of a business elite, he looked quite professional when he did such actions. But as long as one thought about the true identity, status, and image of the Pope, there was an element of absurdity in it. And as the Pope puppet operated, the mimicry image of the spiritual sea in the projection area connected to the device began to change repeatedly. The colorful water droplets constantly adjusted the angle of presentation, and at the same time, the colors quickly faded, forming a general grayish-white base tone. Chapter 843. Yinlu arrived at Luo Nan's rented studio on the dot. Even though Luo Nan hadn't had a normal work and rest schedule for several days in a row, as long as she was his personal secretary, she absolutely couldn't neglect the morning and evening work. She first pressed the intercom outside the workshop, but there was no response. Only then did she verify her fingerprint to enter. The lights of the workshop were on, and the lights and shadows of the virtual work area were fluctuating. Luo Nan sat behind the workbench with one hand supporting his cheek. His figure was frozen, he should be concentrating on his work. However, when he took 2 more steps forward and took a closer look, he discovered that the man's eyes were closed and his breathing was slow. He had actually fallen asleep while maintaining this posture. He probably couldn't take it anymore after working continuously. Yinlu didn't dare to wake Luo Nan up. She just scanned the workshop to see if there was anything that needed to be cleaned up. That moving shelf didn't exist before. Now, it was placed in the middle of the room. It was very conspicuous. Something must have been placed there earlier. It was likely that the veteran had been here before. Yinlu moved the mobile rack to the corner and quietly walked to the workbench. She didn't dare to touch the tools and instruments on the stage. She could only pick up some small things and even took photos to locate them. She didn't want anything to go wrong and she couldn't recover them. It was also at this time that she glanced at the virtual work area. The picture she saw was very familiar. It was like a bottomless sea, or a storm on the surface of the sea. It was thick and colorful, and the structure was chaotic. In fact, it was made up of 2 overlapping pictures. 2 psychic diagrams. The reason why Yinlu was certain of this was because she had seen Luo Nan dismantle and integrate before. Moreover, most of the things she had been busy with recently came from this. It was hard for Yinlu to notice such a complicated and profound diagram. However, she noticed that the whole picture was fluctuating rhythmically, as if it was an interwoven picture of the ocean that was gradually seeping into the real world and becoming a substantial existence. Yinlu was startled, but she soon realized that it might be a misconception. This was because there was a certain amount of distortion and refraction of light in the surroundings of the sleeping Luo Nan. Upon closer inspection, it was clear that the air was fluctuating, resulting in an illusion. Luo Nan wasn't resting. He was cultivating, right? Was there a need to be so desperate? Yinlu couldn't help but recall the letter she had sent to Mrs. Holder, which described her doubts and judgment. Luo Nan, this new boss of hers, had his sights set on the target. The enemy he targeted far exceeded the scope of what should have been. This forced him to never stop moving forward. Instead, he seized every moment and opportunity to improve himself. He was as taut as a humming bowstring. He might shoot a deadly arrow at any time, but he might also snap on his own. Yinlu sighed. Her breath was still lingering in her mouth when a rustling sound rang out at the same time. Behind the workbench, the chair on Luo Nan's body suddenly collapsed without any warning. The wooden body of the chair and the soft cushion on the seat disintegrated into fine dust, and some of the plastic and metal parts were twisted and cracked. At the same time, they were restrained by a certain force, which erased the kinetic energy of the disintegration. They fell in a straight line and fell to the ground. Yin Lo was startled. "Sir." The moment she spoke those words, she felt that there were too many similar exclamations. But when the impact came, what could she do? And this time, the shout had some effect. Luo Nan opened his eyes at this time. As for his body, it floated in midair, maintaining its original natural state without any undulation. "Sir." Yin Lo called out in a probing manner. "Oh, you're here." Luo Nan looked as if he had just woken up. He floated in midair, unfolded his body, and stretched his waist. But his eyes were as bright as stars. He didn't have the hazy appearance of someone who had just woken up. Yin Lo was very curious as to what Luo Nan had been doing, but she couldn't really ask. She could only go with the flow and say, "It's almost 10:30. Sir, do you want to go back and rest?" "Oh, it doesn't matter if I rest or not. I can't stay here for now. It wasn't easy to calibrate the equipment. I might have to start all over again." "Really?" Yin Lo responded with her mouth, but in her mind, she thought of the fluctuating air around Luo Nan. Luo Nan's feet didn't touch the ground. His body turned a few times, and he sat on the wheelchair next to the workbench. He entered into the disabled mode, which required someone to serve him. Yin Li's eyes were still engraved with the image of his natural turning and turning, of his figure that didn't have the slightest trace of smoke and fire. It was unknown how much more brilliant it was than when he used the electromagnetic configuration to propel his fleshly body to float in midair. But when she thought about it in detail, only 2 weeks had passed in between. This degree of improvement. Yin Lu sighed silently. She consciously went behind the wheelchair and did what she needed to do. But when she exerted force, the wheelchair actually became heavy and sluggish. It didn't move at all. "What's wrong with this? I almost forgot. I can't take a car in my current situation. Let's walk back." "What's your situation?" Yin Lu finally found the opportunity to seek knowledge and dispel her doubts. She subconsciously made a guess. "Did you have another breakthrough in your cultivation?" "Nope. I was just playing a game. You can't take it seriously." Yin Lu was at a loss out of habit. The wheelchair beneath Luo Nan didn't need her to exert force at this time. It automatically moved forward and left the room. Yin Lu hurried to catch up. She could confirm that this wasn't the work of the motor built into the wheelchair. Luo Nan ignored the commercial car parked outside after leaving the workshop. He directly controlled the wheelchair to move forward. Yin Lu arranged for the driver to go ahead first. She walked with small steps in her high heels. She followed behind him with clattering sounds. It was close to midnight in the Ping Trade Market. Even in the central area, there were very few pedestrians. The streets were empty, looking quite refreshing. But Luo Nan said, "How impatient." He narrowed his eyes as he spoke. A portion of the soul cloak spread out for thousands of kilometers, tens of thousands of kilometers. Hot bubbles bulged out from the intense light and high temperature. It was like a blazing furnace, roasting the slight fishy smell of the clouds and sea into a complex sensory stimulation. It was transmitted over a distance of 1,500 kilometers. He sensed it, experienced it, and responded to it. Of course, it was just as Luo Nan said. This series of senses was more like the stimulation of a virtual game, and it was a low degree of simulation. It was a bit like the déjà vu of an external neuron taking an offline test. He wasn't even as nervous as he was back then. If he didn't pass the test, he would most likely be in big trouble. Right now, the soul cloak was restraining and resisting him. He was playing hide and seek with a true god in the abyssal region. He arranged a few configurations within the clouds and watched them live and die. He didn't care much about winning or losing. It was just like the Pope of 100 Collections, who claimed to use her body as bait. What tense situation. It was all just talk. How could he be taken seriously? Well, for Bai Xinyan and the other people involved, this wasn't wrong. Only Luo Nan wouldn't. He couldn't do this. Ha! Yin Lu, who had been stunned by Luo Nan's question, instantly became nervous. Mister, which one are you talking about? It's that fish. Luo Nan subconsciously lowered his voice when he said the 3 key syllables. He was a bit mysterious. The Devil Ray was a secret that absolutely could not be exposed in Ban City. Yin Lu had a serious expression. She had never seen Luo Nan speak with this sort of tone before. Many thoughts flashed through her mind in an instant. She calmed her mind with great difficulty and lowered her voice. Yes, mister. You. Luo Nan didn't say much. He just waved his 5 fingers. His meaning was very clear. Yin Lu immediately picked up her bag and wanted to take out the crystal ball with the devil ray sealed inside. But her vigilant mentality made her remember something. She hesitated for a moment before handing over the entire purse. Her body leaned forward, and her lips nearly stuck to Luo Nan's ear as she apologized. I'll have to trouble mister to take a look. Don't take it out for now. I've had a lot of eyes these past 2 days. Oh, that's right. The Deep Blue Walker Squadron, which was his yacht's neighbor, had put in quite a bit of effort these past few days. It was a bit better in the studio, but in a public place, there might be several surveillance cameras pointing at them. It's too early to talk about this. Luo Nan reflected on himself for a moment. He readily followed the advice and opened the purse to search for his target. From his perspective, the lady's purse was more or less a small maze. He could clearly sense the location of the crystal ball, but the complicated design of the purse still tormented him quite a bit. A minute later, Luo Nan extended his hand into the Kuan bag and finally grasped the crystal ball. He felt the marvelous sensation of the crystal ball being indistinguishable between real and illusory. He also felt the instant information that belonged to the devil ray transmitted from the void in between layers. He made a series of fine adjustments to the configuration outline in his mind. Chapter 845. What are these stars doing? Captain Jimmy crossed his arms in front of his chest and subconsciously tapped his feet. The rapid rhythm reflected his current terrible mood. At this time, he was supposed to be preparing for tonight's operation, but an unexpected incident had ruined all his preparations. The surveillance resources that had been fully activated had been reduced to something akin to catching an adulterer in the act. For the time being, no one could give him a response. From his deputy, Mendez, to the surrounding members of the action team, and the SCA officials who had just rushed over to work overtime but were proven to be a waste of time, they all averted their gazes to avoid the unfortunate incident. 2 minutes ago, a video from an intercontinental passenger airship began to spread on the internet. The suspected terrorist attack that happened in the first-class cabin of the airship was recorded from different angles by many witnesses, posted on different social media accounts, and linked with big data. It began to rapidly accumulate views and influence. Until now, there was still no clear explanation for the incident. In fact, even if a nuclear bomb exploded on the airship, Captain Jimmy would not care. The key problem was that Bai Xinyan, who was at the last point of the parallel approval process, was in the area where the incident occurred, and there was still no news of her. The operation approval process was once again stuck. Captain Jimmy felt like he was tripped. It did not hurt him, but it was very depressing. The mission against the remnants of the soul cult was actually not difficult, nor was it urgent or challenging. The reason why Captain Jimmy could not forget about it was largely because he wanted to compete with Bai Xinyan. He did not deny this. He finally had the opportunity to use the situation and the procedure to force Bai Xinyan to yield. Victory was in sight, but something like this happened. What kind of luck did Bai Xinyan have? Whether it was reasonable or not, that was what Captain Jimmy thought in his heart. The procedure went into a standstill again. Captain Jimmy had no choice but to pay attention to the development of the incident and try to learn the truth from the higher-ups. At the same time, he diverted some attention to the B***-starred couple on the street. No matter what, these two were the people who had the most contact with the target, the veteran Shou Xiong and the other vagrants. In other words, they were also suspects, even if they had the blood flame order behind them. Captain Jimmy kicked the chair under the intelligence officers but tried to make his subordinates nervous again. Give me the plan. The one numbered A7. To deal with indirect suspects like Mr. M.O., whose background was clear but whose identity was unknown, the operation team also had a contingency plan. When the captain had nothing to do, he could go on a vacation. Chapter 846. The commercial car went back and forth, Luo Nan boarded the boat, the yacht left the shore, and the boat drove into the center of the lake. There were no accidents in this series of processes. They were extremely compact, without any buffer gaps. Such a rhythm was rare for Luo Nan, at least from Snake Tongue's point of view. Ever since they got to know each other for a long time, the impression Luo Nan gave her in most situations was that he spent long periods of time pondering and delving. He was in an illusory and mysterious state of emptiness. Occasionally, they would interact, and he would be cold and hard, piercing into the deepest depths of one's heart. The current scene was more like someone whipping him from behind or rushing to the front to fight an intense battle. Snake Tongue originally wanted to report the latest intelligence on monitoring Captain Jimmy and the others, but she couldn't find an opportunity to interrupt. After Luo Nan boarded the yacht, he went directly to the warehouse area. He checked the raw materials provided by Snake Tongue and confirmed that they were sufficient. He didn't say anything, but a layer of smoke spread out from his body. The temporarily separated warehouse area wasn't that big. Whether it was Snake Tongue or Yinlu, they were soon enveloped by the smoke. Their figures became hazy and indistinct. What was this? Yinlu turned her head in shock, wanting to communicate with Snake Tongue. However, the two lacked tacit understanding in the end. Snake Tongue didn't pay attention to Yinlu. She just silently watched the roiling smoke beside her, as well as the more detailed components within. Snake Tongue wasn't able to discern too many details because her psychic senses were greatly restricted within this smoke. And the more she delved into the details, the more fuzzy her probing mental senses became. It was as if countless fine blades were sliced into pieces and scattered randomly. They were turned upside down and confused. In the end, she simply doubted her usual self-logic. This feeling was terrible. More importantly, it stimulated Snake Tongue. It made her remember that she had vaguely experienced this scene before. Yes, the cloud world, the mist maze. This was the bizarre location where Luo Nan had attacked, oppressed, and bound Gong Qi. Snake Tongue often boasted that she was experienced and knowledgeable, but she had never seen such a bizarre and despairing world in her entire life. It was precisely there that Snake Tongue and death overlapped. Perhaps it was just a hair's breadth of difference. No matter when she thought about it, she couldn't get rid of the feeling of suffocation. It was also there that she completely lost her freedom of life. Perhaps this included the future that she could look forward to. Snake Tongue's gaze shifted and swept over Yin Li's blurry face. This woman was curiously looking around as if she didn't know anything. Snake Tongue was able to guess this, and Luo Nan spoke at this time. I remember that there are still some exoskeleton accessories here. There are, but they aren't as complete as the ones in the warehouse at Claw Island and the hydroelectric power station. Yinlu reacted quickly. She had long since given up on probing into the profound principles behind Luo Nan's actions. She just waited to deal with the corresponding mundane matters. It's in the other room. I'll go get it. Yeah. See if there are any RAC model wires. I'll have to deal with the sensitivity a bit. Okay. Ian turned around and left. Luo Nan didn't idle while waiting. He opened up the virtual work area, and an extremely complex configuration design was already drawn on it. Snake Tongue shifted her gaze and swept it over. She felt dizzy. However, Luo Nan took the initiative to point at her. In a bit, you'll have to help me install the wires. I need to make adjustments immediately. I can't free up my hands. Yeah. Snake Tongue didn't have any leeway to refuse. Can you understand the design diagram? I can't. Snake Tongue's response was extremely decisive. This was absolutely not the time to act. Otherwise, she would be the one to lose face in a bit. Luo Nan could understand. It doesn't matter. This is just a temporary reinforcement. It mainly depends on the finesse of the operation. Just do it step by step according to what I said. Yeah, I still need to explain the basic logic. He made a hand gesture, and the configuration diagram on the virtual work area was simplified by quite a bit in an instant. It revealed a rather distinct three-layer structure of inner, middle, and outer. Right now I'm using the lamination interference technology. According to my research with Dean Wan, this is a kind of disguise technique that uses perfection to imitate imperfection. First, I do addition, then I do subtraction. Right now I'm doing addition. The basic logic is like this: through the configuration design, I take the imperfect situation of the main body, and through the transition of the exoskeleton and other auxiliary frames, I gradually fill in and make up for it. I map it onto my strongest spacetime configuration, forming a relatively perfect mapping. The meaning of this perfect is quite complicated, but it's something like this. Understand? The first thing Snake Tongue thought of was the attributive word, strongest, before the spacetime configuration. Why did she feel that Luo Nan's strongest point should be mental piercing and control? Therefore, during this period, the configuration design of the virtual workspace was adjusted to a certain extent. It felt more concise and clear. In comparison, Snake Tongue's operation phase was lackluster. She just appeared as an AI assistant. She followed Luo Nan's instructions and installed the wires in the designated locations. Snake Tongue had installed a total of over 30 wires, and they were arranged inside and outside the exoskeleton frame. They were like a mixture of neurons, muscle fibers, blood vessels, and other functional tissues. Every time a wire was installed, the exoskeleton frame would react, and it was an obvious change in shape. The muscle membrane structure produced by the transformation would also quickly cover it, making it look like a single entity. Snake Tongue didn't have the time to look at it in detail. She listened attentively to Luo Nan's instructions. She was engrossed in the installation and traction work. When the work was complete, she tried to look at the fruits of her labor as a whole. But she was stunned to discover that the scenery before her eyes was fading away. The smoke that practically covered the entire warehouse area was fading away without end. This wasn't a result of the leakage and decrease in concentration due to the tight seal. Instead, it corresponded to the steps of continuous adjustment. The chaotic dust within the smoke was like a jigsaw puzzle that gradually became orderly. The orderly layers gradually became clear, forming a stable and ethereal structure. It blended together with the surrounding void that she was accustomed to. The exoskeleton frame also blended inside. Within the fading smoke, the dark infrared exoskeleton, which had just pulled the wires and wrapped the muscle membrane, seemed to have been rubbed by an eraser. Its structure, color, and even substance all became faint and fuzzy. Then it disappeared one by one until it was completely hidden. In the end, only Luo Nan's figure remained in the middle of the warehouse area. He stood there quietly with his head slightly lowered. It seemed that he was pondering something. The smoke, the exoskeleton, and all the corresponding scenes were like an illusion. However, one only needed to see that the vast majority of the compound raw material reserves had been consumed and the empty metal case in Ian Lee's hands. Luo Nan knew that everything that had just happened was true without a doubt. Snake Tongue thought of Luo Nan's words from a few minutes ago, the large gear set that wanted to merge with heaven and earth. The merging was quite thorough. As for how Luo Nan was able to accomplish this, Snake Tongue really couldn't guess. The operation of this round far exceeded the scope of her knowledge structure. Snake Tongue was stunned, and Ian Lee's reaction was even greater. She blurted out a question. Is it done? A portion. I still need to test it. Luo Nan flexed and extended his 10 fingers as he spoke. On the other hand, Yinlu finally had the leeway to use her brain when it came to mundane matters. She quickly said, I'll immediately contact D's city's side and the boss's side. I'll tell them about Mr. Mo's identity. It'll be good if we can interfere with them a bit. As for Mr. Mo. She hesitated for a moment before speaking, can we first leave the yacht? Temporarily avoid contact with them, just like 10 days ago. Yinlu made the connection to Luo Nan's mysterious and possibly world-shaking operation last time. It also began with leaving the yacht. We really do need to leave. What Yinlu said was already within Luo Nan's plans. Since she mentioned it, he didn't say anything more. He simply waved his hand, you guys keep an eye on this side. I'll go greet True God and the Pope. If things go smoothly, it shouldn't take too long. Yes. Ha. Yinlu suddenly froze on the spot, and Snake Tongue wasn't any better. Luo Nan was truly straightforward and efficient. He simply turned around and headed outside after speaking. The warehouse's exit wasn't in front of him, but the sealed cabin wall of the yacht. The scene of the yacht's cabin wall being torn apart 10 days ago instantly flashed in Ian Lee's mind. She subconsciously opened her mouth, but before she could speak, she saw Luo Nan's figure pass through the rack of materials in front of the cabin wall like a phantom. He also passed through the thick cabin wall itself. There were no changes to the scene before him. The only thing missing was the living person. Fortunately, this feedback was clear and continuous. It helped Luo Nan adjust his position. From the theoretical ideal state of the laboratory, he adapted step by step to the variables of the real world. Also, they had to test the remote login that had to be realized immediately. I need to adjust my character properly when I log in. I almost forgot. Luo Nan loosened his hand and took out the crystal ball from Ian Lee's backpack. He silently merged it into the space-time bubble. It was as if the devil ray inside had been sucked up from a deep well. It approached from afar, its body rapidly enlarging and recovering. Its wing-like pectoral fins undulated up and down as it swam around Luo Nan. From Luo Nan's angle, the two sides were so close that the tip of the devil ray's fin and stinger streaked past his eyelids time and time again. Even though this was a giant mutant, Luo Nan still placed it within a space-time bubble, isolating it from the normal space-time environment. The technique seemed simple, but it was actually peerlessly complex. Luo Nan was able to seamlessly connect such an enormous life form. It was completely built upon Luo Nan's long-term research on the Devil Ray and his even deeper attainments in space-time configuration. But this way, the space-time bubble was able to bear an even greater pressure. Hidden injuries had already appeared on part of the exoskeleton frame, and its durability was worrying. But today's matter could not be carried out in a protracted battle. Currently, it was too protracted. From the workshop to the yacht, and then to the bottom of the lake, it took at least 20 minutes to make a full circle. During this time, Luo Nan and the true god practically broke away from each other. Luo Nan borrowed the advantage of pure observation of his soul strength to come and go as he pleased in the abyss region. Luo Nan was barely able to hook onto the true God, making it hard for the true God to come to a conclusion. Otherwise, the true God would have long since turned his attention to Luo Nan and swept through all of Ban City. Even so, the true God was certainly suspicious. Over at Ban City, the search activities originating from the Amaterasu Pure Land on the mental plane continued to intensify and become more and more strict. Human flesh search and offline PK. This was the fundamental train of thought of the true God and the Pope. This matter could happen anywhere, but it could not happen in Ban City. Luo Nan narrowed his eyes slightly. His gaze pierced through the barrier of the void and the rippling waves of water. In a trance, he saw a similar environment 1,500 kilometers away. It was also below the surface of the water, but it was nearly 100 meters deep at the bottom of the sea. Luo Nan chose this sort of environment to be the novice village for his new character to log online. To put it bluntly, it was the place where the space-time bubble would begin its remote mapping. With the support of the Soul Cloak, which covered the entire world and had the condensation ring as its foundation, there was no environment more suitable for exerting power than an environment rich in water molecules. What Luo Nan needed to do was to borrow the Soul Cloak to project the basic configuration design of his main body over. Of course, his consciousness came along with it. Luo Nan's consciousness really seemed to have grown from the bottom of the sea 1,500 kilometers away. He was very familiar with this. He often used similar methods over the past few months to project the core of his own concept into the South Pacific Ocean. He borrowed the abundant water vapor conditions there to play hide-and-seek with the powerful extraordinaries from all over the world. He misled them, embedding the concepts of Enlightenment Palace and a new plane within. Luo Nan even gave this method a name. It was called Luo's Core. From his perspective, Luo's core and lamination interference technology should be equivalent in terms of core. They were both rooted in the configuration system. But the former spent most of their time hiding behind natural phenomena, confusing the public and seeing, forever hiding in the shadows of people's perception. But Luo Nan relied on the lamination interference technology to become the focal point of everything. He controlled the information that was leaked to the outside, turning the fake into the real. He withstood the multidimensional test of extraordinaries. This required the pinnacle of detail. In extreme situations, the nitpicking of details was never a test of one's attitude. It was a test of technique. The conditions of seawater and lake water were different. There was an essential difference between what was real and what was fake. What was fake was fake. Some laboratory designs would naturally reveal their flaws after the environment changed. The cause might just be the change in air pressure, temperature difference, or even salinity. Luo Nan would never have thought of these details when he was constructing his theory. Even now, he couldn't consider putting all the conditions in. Otherwise, the configuration design would be cumbersome. His head might explode before he could even face a true God. Luo Nan could only rely on the principles of the lamination interference technology and his own attainments in spacetime configuration to add and subtract. He let the negative feedback of the outside world grind away the mistakes and redundant things. He was currently the redundancy between heaven and earth. But in order to achieve this high-level redundancy, he needed to abandon the low-level design. He needed to grasp the elements that were more in line with the essence. He needed an existence that was infinitely close to reality to be placed there. He needed to obtain the natural feedback of heaven and earth. This was a process of constant grinding and adjustment. It was to the point where Luo Nan ignored the passage of time in the outside world. He ignored the concrete changes until the sunlight pierced through the seawater and illuminated the gloomy world. Ah, I've been discovered. Was it that kind of discovery? Chapter 850. The interference power that came from within the light carried a familiar flavor. This was the unique quality of a true God. It wasn't an absolute thing to say. Even though they were of the same system, the feeling the Pope gave off was more or less the same. In any case, it was the kind of bright, dazzling, fully burning, scorching feeling. This power combined with the rules and laws of the great divine treasure of the propping mulberry tree. It was like a propulsion furnace that supplied energy to the propping mulberry tree. It was also like the entire propping mulberry tree was its fuel. However, there was still a slight difference from the brief confrontation that occurred a few days ago in the wilderness laboratory. Back then, the true God, under the urging of negative emotions, did not hold back at all. The true God tore through the barrier of the void and smashed over. But now, the true God was in a semi-detached state, performing a routine scan. He had accidentally caught the true God pausing for an instant before the true God exerted its power a second time. This tiny disconnect was far too obvious and slow on Luo Nan's current level. He even had the time to adjust his set of configuration details in response to the sudden change in environment. Only then did he stir, allowing the projected spacetime bubble, no, it should be said that the game character he had just created, to log in and go online. No matter how tedious, tense, and precise the preparatory work he had done before logging in, no matter how much energy he had consumed, Luo Nan's mood was strangely calm when he truly arrived at the moment of verification. Against the light that illuminated the surrounding seabed, Luo Nan came into contact with the true God's pressure that penetrated through space. He had a rough idea of what was going on. A slight distortion occurred in the structure of the seawater 100 meters deep. A high-frequency vibration existed on the mental plane, destroying the existing environment. It also forced the surrounding living beings to break away from their original rhythm and expose themselves. The true God's methods could not be said to be wrong. In fact, they were quite brilliant. The underwater life forms in the surrounding area were like a sieve. They were screened out as long as they had the slightest bit of suspicion. Immediately after, a scorching mental attack, like an electric net, came down with a buzz. In 3 to 5 seconds, the lives of over a dozen species, whether they were mutants or ordinary sea creatures, were forcefully stripped away. But at this time, the new character, who had just logged in, followed the tiny arc of the distorted spacetime structure. It smoothly shuttled back and forth. It was as if the character was sliding on a guideway. Even though there was still a slight dissonance when the gears were engaged and switched, it added a proper texture. On this trajectory, the mental attacks that could have been fatal were like brilliant fireworks. They seemed to explode at a low altitude, like stars falling like rain, but in reality, they did not hit the ground at all. An error in judgment. Of course, this was a mistake on the part of the true God. His attack had completely missed. From Luo Nan's perspective, this was an excellent piece of evidence. The configuration design idea has passed the test. The conduction and transformation of the soul cloak are also going smoothly. It's basically operating without any problems, but the feedback from the outside world needs to be corrected. What about the degree of realism? The controller at the bottom of North Mountain Lake was still thinking in an orderly manner. But at the same time, the experiencer, who shared the same lineage at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, received a clear, powerful, and admiring mental message from a true God. You're here. Good job. It was indeed excellent. Luo Nan gave himself a thumbs up without the slightest hesitation. Looking at it from a certain angle, the true God was exposing his own ignorance, and Luo Nan absolutely wouldn't be so kind as to warn him. Luo Nan didn't receive a response, but the true God's transmitted mental message clearly contained impatience. There wasn't the slightest bit of hesitation within it. The soul cloak that completely covered Luo Nan transmitted back feedback. Within the clouds of the stratosphere, the true God's transmitted power made another round of movement. The center of gravity changed, and it locked onto the surface of the distant Pacific Ocean. Soon, an even more direct response appeared from the depths of the sea. The roots of the Fusang divine tree were rapidly digging in, interweaving into an incorporeal network. The blazing power churned, interfering with each other on the mental and material planes, forming burst after burst of intense light. It was like a photographer's capture operation. The range was correct, but the situation of losing focus was more serious. At least, Luo Nan hadn't truly been locked onto yet. Luo Nan had even abandoned many things during this period of time. Perhaps the addition of these things would have been more perfect in theory, but in actual combat, in a rapidly changing environment, these were merely meaningless details. The true God wouldn't pay attention to them, and Luo Nan didn't need to waste them. The situation was developing in the direction that Luo Nan hoped for. It was absolutely impossible to create a Luo Nan riding a devil ray and directly greet a true God. But he had to make those two believe, at least partially, that Luo Nan was right here without truly seeing Luo Nan face to face. So far, Luo Nan had succeeded. Luo Nan maintained his silence. He controlled the space-time bubble to shuttle back and forth within the tight structure of space and time. Chapter 851. The region of the soul cloak was fragmented, rising and falling amidst the fine waves of the sea breeze. Luo Nan was within the cogwheel set of the space-time structure. He moved and did not move. What did not move was his role. In the strict structure of time and space, the change opened up an undeserved gap, becoming a redundancy that was originally non-existent. It continued to operate without being directly rejected. What moved was his relative position. From the bottom of the sea to the sky, from the deep water to the clouds, he drove millions upon millions of water molecules to gather and disperse, provoking the senses of a true God. He was like the water spirit of legend. He leaped and shuttled through the water vapor, coming and going unfathomably. This feeling was a bit similar to an out-of-body experience. Ever since Luo Nan's soul cloak covered the entire world, he experienced less and less of this drifting feeling of a kite with its string cut. Luo Nan did not forget for a moment that his soul strength and fleshly body were still in a serious state of imbalance. Though he had the soul cloak's vast coverage to help disperse the imbalance, and he had the complex structure of the sandwich domain to provide a buffer, an imbalance was an imbalance. He had to pay attention to the coupling state of his body and soul frame at all times. He had to maintain a difficult balance between his God gear, which had entered an uncontrollable state of explosive expansion, and his body gear, which was limited by its physical nature. Sometimes, thoughts like this would jump out in Luo Nan's mind: I might as well throw away my fleshly body. It's so weak, clumsy, and it always drags me down. Especially when fighting against a powerful enemy. I have to split half of my mental energy to ponder over how to hide this fatal weakness. Of course, the leaping and flickering thoughts of humans were the most unreliable. From a rational point of view, abandoning one's fleshly body was the same as destroying one's foundation in the material world. The mode of existence of life, established over billions of years of evolutionary history, would transform into a phantom of nothingness. Perhaps there would be a certain amount of inertia in a short period of time, making it easier to operate. But in the long run, it was impossible to support the endless cultivation of the future. Whether it was the lessons of blood that had emerged endlessly in the short few decades of Earth, or the rigorous theories of the mysterious civilization displayed by the virtual brain system, all of them emphasized and verified this point from multiple perspectives. Luo Nan was a rational person under most circumstances. It was impossible for the occasional crazy thought to shake the wall of his rationality. He could not let his heart be blinded by lard and step onto a dead end. He was just taking a break from his busy schedule to experience the illusory pleasure of being completely unrestrained. Luo Nan was not completely illusory. In this state, Luo Nan already possessed the foundation of self-sufficient physical laws to a certain degree through the combination and interference of spacetime configurations. In fact, half a year ago, Luo Nan had used the condensation ring to break through the barrier between the mental and material planes in one fell swoop. He had realized the leap from 0 to 1. He had flown at a speed that exceeded everyone's imagination on this great road to the heavens. From the copulation between the condensation ring and the external neuron to the birth of the soul cloak. From the coupling of the divine chakra and the body chakra to the deep sea scene that was the foundation of the framework. Then, in the form of a soul cloak, it completely broke free from its shackles and extended to cover the earth and many other dimensions of space and time. When Luo Nan's attainments on the mental plane repeatedly broke through the limits of the imagination of ordinary people, the configuration system of the virtual brain system gave Luo Nan a timely path to deepen and feed back. His rapid progress in configuration design, especially in the design of space-time configurations, allowed him to draw support from the omnipresent water molecules of every plane of space and time. He could even draw support from the even more inconceivable structure of space and time itself to construct a material foundation. He could twist the physical laws and temporarily replace a portion of his fleshly body. This gave him a feeling of immersion that was close to reality. Needless to say, there was even the true God, a scene setter. Right now, the true God was no longer making meaningless attempts after repeated fruitless attempts to converse with Luo Nan. Correspondingly, his methods became even more intense. The pitch-black curtain of night between the sea and the sky had already been sliced to pieces by the true God's blazing killing intent. In an area with a diameter of nearly 100 kilometers, a long and narrow band of intense light and lightning was left in the atmosphere. It left marks on the retinas of living beings that were hard to fade away in a short amount of time. The layers were complex and crisscrossed like an inescapable net. Any living being within this area, whether they were swimming in the sea, flying in the air, or floating on the surface of the water, was faced with imminent disaster. Even if they were not directly cut, just the aftershocks of the overlapping vibrations would press down from the mental plane to the material plane. Then the aftershocks would reverse the effects. After a few rounds of interference, a high-temperature furnace of boiling poisonous gas was formed. The violent killing intent of an extraordinary was far deadlier than any poison in the world. The true God was absolutely not the kind of idiot who wouldn't turn back until he ran into a wall. Don't look at how he had chased Luo Nan for a long time without success. He had other methods of dealing with this process. The projection of the Fusang divine tree shot through the air within this land of death. Its incorporeal roots extended outwards, greedily devouring the flesh, blood, and life force of the surrounding living beings. It borrowed the nourishment of the boiling emotions between life and death to gradually turn from a projection of nothingness into reality. At the very least, the power descending from the abyssal region grew more and more real and terrifying. At the same time, it formed an even more powerful compression effect on the surrounding void. The true God seemed to have sensed something. Having lost a reliable fulcrum of believers, it was very difficult for the true God to display a direct method like he did a few days ago in the wilderness. But the method of boiling a frog in warm water possessed a certain degree of feasibility. It manifested the true God's clear train of thought that was the complete opposite of his violent actions. The undulating undulations of his soul cloak were weakening in regularity. This was the result of the water molecules pervading the atmosphere suffering substantial damage. This was also the result of the warping and deformation of the structure of space and time. It was as if Luo Nan was playing a game of parkour. He had to find a relatively safe route in this vile environment. He had to avoid the projected space-time bubble from colliding head-on with the true God's Fusang divine tree system. Fortunately, this game had a time limit and a finish line. The true God's methods had already partially exceeded the scope of the Fusang divine tree system. It was the type of overclocking. Don't look at the oppressive warm water on the plane of reality. Compared to the abyssal region, it was already a volcanic eruption-like impact and turbulence. This was a good thing. Even with the true God's abilities, it was impossible to maintain this impact force for a long period of time over 1,000 kilometers. Therefore, Luo Nan knew what he had to do. His consciousness anchored the destination within the intermittent soul cloak and the warping void gap. It was the intercontinental airship that was gradually slowing down. It was already beginning to deviate from its course. It was also the location of the trap set up by the true God and the Pope. Luo Nan could more or less guess the situation over there. But no matter what, it was better for everyone to meet face to face. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.